Hey everybody, welcome back to FloTrack's Monday Review. I'm Lincoln Shrike, joined by Olivia Ekpone once again. I was gone last weekend, I was in New Orleans. Now Kevin's gone and he's in New Orleans. When are you going to New Orleans?
I have no idea, but next week I'll be in Maryland, so
okay.
we're just hopping all over the place now.
We're taking the three people, trimming it down to two for at least a couple weeks. We'll all be back in full force eventually.
Yes.
Though the trio will be back together soon enough. But without Kevin, we still have stuff to recap. Obviously, last week, the big story in track and field were some new Olympic standards. Was the Diamond League deciding that they had too many events and we need to cut down on some of those. We will get to some of that, give some final thoughts on those Olympic standards, because you can talk about it forever, but eventually these athletes are going to have to go hit them, and we can complain about them all we want, but they're going to stay. And then on the Diamond League, we'll talk about what events we think maybe will be getting cut. We'll also highlight there was some track and field action, even though we're kind of in between indoors and outdoors. So there is some stuff to recap, and why not? We'll just get it started right away. Olivia, what was your weekend highlight on the track specifically? Was there anything you saw that you liked?
Yes. Did anybody see Houston run this weekend? Like, that was a blazing time, and what I'm specifically talking about is that 4x1. They went 38:82.
Yeah.
That is blazing fast, and I was looking back, I was like, wow, last year at the NCAA championships, they broke the record with a 38:17, so we're only off by a couple tenths when you think about it, and it's only the first race of them actually getting together, running on the track. I was able to watch the race. They had very clean handoffs. I was very impressed. Normally when it's the first time, bringing the stick all the way around, it can get a little wobbly just because they've been focused on NCAAs up until this point. And so the fact that they had very clean handoffs, had a very executed race, was very phenomenal to watch.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things for me here. I mean, one, the second leg, Mario Burke just finished second in the 60. 5 days after, I mean, no break at all for him between indoors. Obviously, he's a sprinter, so it's a little different than maybe a distance runner coming back. But still, I mean, you know, you were a sprinter. Is it weird to like literally not take a break between indoors and outdoors? I mean, to race like 5 days later, that seemed like crazy.
Yes, it is crazy, but it's the fact that, you know, when there's no transition like that, we really just have to hop into it. It's just a matter of being mentally strong and just knowing, hey, indoors is over now. It's time to actually focus on the real outdoor season, which is when it really all counts. So you just got to keep pushing, put everything into the back of your mind with that. And
with Houston, we're going to have basically a full season series with them. They've been very open with us, and they have an incredible program, and it's going to be exciting to see what they do this year, led by Leroy Burrell, obviously Carl Lewis. The thing I want to highlight, yes, they did break the NCAA record last year, but that was with Elijah Hall, I mean, obviously a guy we know who's run 200 super fast, 100 super fast, and Cam Burrell, the 100 champ from last year. So it's the depth. Those guys aren't there anymore, but they still have Burke, who's like now rising to a whole new level, running really fast in the 60. And then a couple new guys, Nick Taylor, Nick Alexander, my mistake, and some other new guys that weren't on the scene last year that are coming on, and looks like they're going to be very, very strong. I mean, 38:82, we looked at it through the archives, only one NCAA team has run faster than that before March 15th. Now, obviously, you have to do some squinting to like really hype into that time. It's not a top 10 all-time mark, but at the time of the year it is, how long until teams are going to actually be peaking for outdoor? It's a spectacular time. And I would agree with you. I think it was the highlight of the week. If there was one, most teams are resting. Maybe aren't going to debut for a couple more weeks, given where NCAA Outdoors is on the schedule in June. But this was certainly a highlight. Now for me, I went to the roads. The New York City half was yesterday. Wasn't particularly notable as far as time on the men's side, but I did love the fact Belay Tilahun of Ethiopia, he won despite wearing bib number 1163, meaning he wasn't even on the invited pro field. I don't know if it was a late entry or what, but he started behind the main pro group.
Wow.
And he still won. The announcers didn't know who he was. I mean, you can't blame him. It was just kind of like he almost bandited the race. He just hopped in at the last moment and got the win over guys like Paul Chelimo and a bunch of top Americans. So highlights to me how still deep, obviously, East Africa is on the distance side, that basically no name can come in. He's got a 27:11, 10K PR. He's run 61 minutes. But man, the chaos that can reign in track and field when you don't know someone's name and they don't even start at the top. This is exactly what happened yesterday, and you know, we may not hear of this guy's name ever again, just because there's so much depth for Kenya and East Africa, Kenya and Ethiopia. But that was hilarious to me, to have a guy that no one knew who he was, didn't have his name on the bib, but he's beaten guys like Paul Chalimo in the half marathon, just once again highlighting the depth of East Africa. Okay, moving on. There wasn't much to highlight on the track specific, the actual running events. But what was your number of the week?
My number of the week was 11.3, and I also want to throw. I'm going like based off you now, where I'm going to kind of flip-flop around here. But I want to say the 100 just because we have Bernessa Thompson of Texas A&M who ran at the Baldy Castillo Invitational in Arizona State University this past weekend. She opened up with an 11.3, and I thought that was very phenomenal. And I also, just because we have been talking about Houston for a little bit, I want to throw in Brandon Taylor actually ran a 10.34 this week too. Yeah. So the 100s right now look pretty solid going into the outdoor season. So I'm very impressed with that.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're within the ballpark of, for the men, and if you're close to breaking 10.3 at this time of the year, and then on the women, obviously being 11.3, I mean, Thompson there is not far off the standard at 11.15 there. And again, it's March. Yeah. The Olympic standard, I should say. That's a good mark, even though I'll say you're an A&M alum, you're choosing an A&M. We got to, no, I'm just kidding. That's, but what is 11.3? When you run that in March, like what does that, every athlete's different, but what does that say about your potential for later on in the season?
I think it shows a lot of potential just because when you really think about it, even though the 60 meters is the shortest race for indoor, when it comes to the 60 and the 100 meters, you have 40 meters to kind of give or take and what will actually happen. So the race actually is now a little bit more extended. So when you look into it as the 100 perspective, an 11.3 right now in March says a lot just because we're kind of pushing further past the 60 meters. So now as we go into the outdoor season, I expect Thompson to drop down to possibly like an 11 low, just because it's so early. And, of course in Arizona, the weather is probably a little bit nicer right now. But as we approach to NCAAs, where it's going to be here in Austin, of course it's going to be so hot. Yeah. So,
the sprinters will love that.
The sprinters, yes, of course. Everybody loves the warm weather when it comes to sprinting. But yeah, I can definitely see that time really dropping. So that says a lot right now.
What is the transition? I know 60 wasn't or 100 wasn't specifically your focus, but what is the transition from the 60 to the 100 like? Are you adding more volume as you go outdoors? I'm just curious because it is almost double we relate so much 60 performance to 100 performance, but it is almost double the distance.
You're probably going to laugh at me, but it also comes with strength.
Yeah. No, I get that.
We're like, wait, more strength for only 440 meters, but it's true because a lot of things happen within that last 40 meters of the race. So when you're used to running the 60, and it's close, then you're like, oh my goodness, I have to run an extra 40 meters on top of that, even though it might not seem like a lot, but it's huge when it comes to sprinting.
Hey, I've never gone fast, but I've sprinted 100 meters. 100 meters can hurt. So anyone thinks, and 200 meters can really hurt if you're going it all out. Hey, so I don't hate on the sprints at all, even though I never did the sprints. Some people may find that hard to believe. Just kidding. Okay, my number of the week was 8. That is the number of disciplines that will be cut in starting in 2020 from the Diamond League. We know we know the 5K is going to be cut, and we can assume that with the 8 disciplines, I imagine we're counting for both genders. So we've gone from 32, so we're probably going to, we take the 5K out, and then we get down to 30 because we'll cut the men's and the women's. They haven't announced yet what other distances or field events, which there will be some field events cut from this. They can't just cut from the running event. Yeah. They haven't announced which ones will also be cut with the 5K. I mean, they didn't specifically say the 5K was going to be cut. They just said there's not going to be any distance longer than 3,000, which obviously means they're going to cut the 5K.
But I'm not feeling this whatsoever, Lincoln. I'm really not.
Okay. On the track, can we think of any other distances that could be cut that would not cause mass outrage? What I'm just trying to figure out, because
I don't know.
Yes, there's going to be some field events cut. I can see the discus being cut. No, I'm sure there's some discus fans out there, and I love a good discus myself, but I could see that one being cut. But we go to the track, they can't just go, okay, we got the 5K, track fans will be mad, but we'll go all to the field events. We're going to cut the triple, we're going to cut the long, we're going to cut the high. I mean, they can't cut all the field events. And not we'd want to. We have great high jumpers, great pole vaulters, great, Christian Taylor in the triple. I'm just curious, what could they possibly cut from the track? And I don't know. I mean, the 1, the 2, and the 4. What do you look at the 200 and you say?
Because it's in the middle between the 100 and the 400.
But I mean, like, you're going to lose some star power from the Diamond League here. We got an
Yes.
American in Noah Lyles, who is the best 200 runner on the planet right now. We're going to remove his primary event. I mean, I'm just saying, we still have likely, if they cut the same discipline for men and women, we still have, am I right here? Yeah, 3 more disciplines to be cut. So they could cut it 1 or 2 field events, and then they still have to cut something from the track. You can't cut the 100. I mean, you have Christian Coleman, you have, still have Justin Gatlin, you have tons of stars. You can't cut the 4.
Right.
We have Michael Norman, we have Wade Van Niekerk, and on the women's side, obviously, we still have Allison Felix, we still have Shawnee Miller-Wade. I mean, I can go over and over again on each side of those. You could look at something like one of the hurdles races. I don't think you can do that. I mean, we've got Sydney McLaughlin on the women's side. We got Rye Benjamin on the men. I mean, there's just stars on stars on stars. You can't force them to choose another event because then their star power is not as high. It's going to be crazy to see what events. Now, again, we're a year away. We're still going to have the Diamond League as usual this season, but going into 2020, more for me than even the Olympic standards. This is nuts to me that they're going to do this because. I assume most people watching are probably bigger like track fans and field fans. I could be wrong about that, but they're going to have to cut another event from the track, and I don't know what you cut. I mean, do you cut the steeplechase? I mean, we just had the world record last year on the women's side, and the men's side is always entertaining between Jaeger and the Kenyans, and it's just crazy. I think they're going to cut one of the sprint events, and it's going to, and the 200 is the only one that makes sense.
That's the only one that does, yeah.
And it doesn't make sense. That's the thing. I mean,
This is going to hurt us so much, and when I found out about this, I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, the Diamond League is so big, and it just gives us the opportunity to really showcase what athletes we have across the country. It's not the same as the Olympics, but it's pretty much up there when it's not an Olympic year. Like,
of course.
You have everyone coming from different countries competing. So now I'm thinking, what events are we possibly going to be able to cut out?
I mean, they've said, like with the 5K, there'll still be some meets where the events that are cut will be in the program. They just won't be diamond things. But that takes money out of it for the athletes, and that takes incentive, and that means performances will suffer. I'm not a fan of this, and I can be sympathetic to the IAAF when they're trying to do things to make the sport better for a wider audience. Obviously, we're always going to be somewhat a purist because we came to the sport young.
Yeah.
And we're not looking at it. We're looking at it from an athlete's perspective and seeing, being impressed by what these professional athletes can do. And other people, the IAAF, they want to look at it from a fan base perspective of people that are just watching for the entertainment value. And maybe a meet that's loaded with so many races isn't as entertaining and maybe is a little long. I get that, but I kind of equate this to me to like in baseball, they're trying to like install a pitch clock to speed the game up. And while that may do the job here of speeding the meet up and making it a tighter TV window package, I don't think it does the sport good overall by cutting down some events. Again, they could just cut the 5K and then cut field events, and still you're going to have pushback there. But I think, to be fair to field event athletes, they're going to have to cut another track event. And I don't think anything makes sense besides the 200. And that's going to be tough. Like, yes, like Noah Lyles can run the 100. And obviously, I'm sure I'm missing some female athletes that are 200 specialists here. But, Daphne Shippers, of course. But you're if you do that, I'm not saying the 200 is going to be cut. It's just the one that kind of makes the most sense.
Yeah.
That affects the sport and it affects some of your stars, and I just can't get in line with that, and I just do not agree that this is good in the long term for the sport.
I agree completely.
So that's where we stand with the Diamond League. We do get a full Diamond League slate again this season. We'll have a going away party for it, I guess, at the end of the year. Okay, so last week the other big news besides the Diamond League, possibly the bigger news, was the crazy fast Olympic standards, also the rollout, and this is for 2020, also the rollout, of course, of the world ranking system, so how they'll build the field. Roughly 50% will get it through hitting these really, really fast standards, and then the other 50% will get it via their world ranking. There was some controversy late in the week. Let'sRun.com broke the news that the United States will not take athletes specifically on their world ranking if they finish top 3. They will have to have the standard, which will mean some athletes, of course, will go in and they could finish top 3 and be bumped out, even though the IAAF would say, hey, by virtue of your position, you would be good enough via the world rankings. So the USATF will stick with, you have to hit the standard, and then obviously, as we know, the standards are really fast. My urging to everyone, and a lot of this anger, a lot of the frustration, I think, is being rooted, you could say rightfully so or not, by Let's Run. They've been heavily reporting on this and kind of freaking out that USATF isn't going to honor the world ranking if an athlete finishes top 3. You have to have the standard, which is kind of the way it's always been. But I'm urging everyone to calm down. It's going to be okay. First of all, in the sprints, it's not an issue, right? I mean, the sprints, yes, the times are quicker, but you're not going to make the women's 100 team if you haven't run under 11:15. I mean, you're probably not going to make the final. I mean, so the
That's
sprints,
exactly what I was thinking too.
I'm not worried about at all, and I don't think really anyone is. I mean, we look at the men's 400. I mean, 44.90 is the standard.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a collegiate last year run 43.6. I don't think we're worried too much about anything on the sprint side. I think the biggest issue right now is, of course, the marathon, where the U.S. specifically on the men's side is very, very weak. The standard is 2:11.30. Only one man in the last couple of years has done that, Galen Rupp, obviously an Olympic bronze medalist. I think everyone's freaking out. Now, you can get the standard by finishing top 10 at a world marathon major, and that's where it does kind of open things up. But for the marathon, I can see why some athletes would be frustrated. This is just announced. You know, on the sprinting events, obviously, you can run hundreds of races between now and the beginning of the Olympics.
Yeah.
And you can hit your standard. On the Olympics, you have, before the trials, you have 1, maybe 2 races here.
Yeah.
And for the men, it can cause a little bit of trouble. I did look into last year, how many guys, if the standards would have been implemented last year, how many guys would have hit the standard? And it would have been 9 men. So it's not like we're just by virtue of the fact that only one guy's run under 2:11.30 last couple of years, Galen Rupp, doesn't mean only one guy would have had the standard. We had some guys finish top 10 at the World Marathon Majors, and there would have been 9 guys that would have had the standard. Obviously, it's no guarantee that the top 3 will all come out of that, so it's a little bit of an unfortunate thing here, but I would urge some caution for that. And then on the women's side, 14 ladies would have had the standard, again, by virtue of either running under 2:29.30 or of a top 10 finish. So it does stink a little bit with how they rolled this out, specifically for the longer distances, that the timing is not good. They're not going to have a ton of races to get these marks. But we had 9 men that did it last year and 14 women that would have had the standard last as well. The only reason I could see some pushback on that is a lot of those top 10 marks top 10 finishes came at Boston last year, where the weather was terrible and a lot of the East Africans dropped out. So maybe we don't have that. Obviously, we probably don't predict to have a weather conditions like that allowed so many Americans to get in the top 10, and that's where we could have some issues. These people that I mentioned, the 9 on the men and the 14 on the women, they don't have the standard. I'm not saying that. It's just like, if the situation played out again, we would have this many athletes getting the standard. I think it's going to be okay by the time the trials arrive. We'll have some athletes sneak in and finish in the top 10 in Boston and possibly in London as well. And so it is a little bit troublesome on the marathon side. I think it won't be as big of a controversy as it seems once we actually get down to the trials. What was your final thoughts on the standards?
I completely agree with you when it came to the sprints. Like, if you're not running an 11:15, you're probably not going to even make the team anyway.
Yeah. Right.
So, like, those standards for the sprints, I completely understand. I had a lot of people text me and message me, like, what do you think about this? And I'm just like, well, when you think about it, the Americans were pretty dominant and were fast anyway, so it's not like it's going to make much of a difference when it comes to the sprints. But how I'm viewing it, like, in its entirety, like, if we're looking at the Olympics, a lot of people look at it in a perspective of country representation. So this is where we see a lot of people from all over the world compete. So that's obviously going to affect a lot of countries. So it's going to be I see when it comes to the track perspective, it's going to be very limited on how many athletes we actually have. So moving forward, how is that going to affect, like, the heats as we move forward at the Olympics?
Well, that's one thing I was confused, because you always do see at the Olympics athletes from countries. I mean, frankly, athletes that didn't hit the standard and are there by virtue of a country getting their one entry or whatever, and they have no shot to even make it out of the first round.
Yeah.
Will this affect that at all? I wasn't clear on that. Like, will a sprinter from, I'm just throwing out a country, Saudi Arabia, be affected by this. You know, they want to represent their country.
Exactly.
On the men's side, they may have run only 10.5. They're not going to hit the standard, and they're not going to have the world ranking.
Right.
But
that's the only thing that I was just like, what's going to happen when it gets
and obviously each country will still be limited to three per event. So a lot of questions still to be answered about this.
Yes.
As is sometimes typical, unfortunately, with the IAAF on the PR side, this wasn't rolled out very efficiently, and I think it was rolled out way I understand why they did it last week, because they didn't want to interrupt, NCAA indoors with this uproar, and they were anticipating obviously some pushback here. But we also knew that faster standards were coming, and to be honest, we thought that the standards would be a little bit quicker, because we had heard through the grapevine that there was possibly they were going to take the top 10 times from last year, the 10th fastest time in each discipline, or 10th best mark, and that was going to be the standard. So the standards are a little bit away from that, even they're not as quick. Listen, you got to hit the standards, and I see some like things here of like, for example, Paul Chelimo, like if they would have had the standard at 13:13.5 when he ran the 5K in 2016, he wouldn't have made the team. Well, I look at that, and then of course he wouldn't have gotten the silver medal. I look at that and I say he would have run the standard. I mean, he would have had to go to another race. He wasn't incentivized to have to run that fast.
Yeah.
So, the Americans will hit the standards. The only thing I'm truthfully worried about is the marathon on the men's side, and maybe the 10,000 meters a little bit, but the biggest problem was how this was rolled out, how late in the game this was rolled out, and how different it is. And then you also combine it with the Diamond League stuff.
Yes.
It created this just massive
cloud
of like outrage. And I think in general track and field we spend way too much time freaking out about changes. The sport will have to change a little bit. Now, do I think cutting 8 disciplines from the Diamond League is the right way to do it? No. But I'm fine with some changes here and there to keep the sport from becoming rigid and old and too set in its ways.
Yeah.
This is going to happen. I don't think we need to have some outrage. I do think, though, it's fair to push back NCAA when they consider cutting 8 disciplines, where that doesn't seem like that's necessarily going to help things. So
we should just throw the indoor 400-meter hurdle race now.
Yeah.
That's what I really think we should do moving forward.
That'd be a good way to help things out.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if there was any other news of the week that you had.
No, not that I can think of.
I think that was essentially it. The action on the track is just getting started, coming off NCAA indoors. Obviously, the pros, given that the World Championships, we didn't say it at the top.
Oh, we didn't.
Are
say
193
it.
days away, so we're inside the 200s, but still long. I was thinking about it today. I was like, in 100 days, we'll still have 3 months. That's just is a long way out.
Yeah.
We still have a long way to go and a long time to rehash these Olympic standards. Again, don't go into effect in 2019, so we can kind of breathe a sigh of relief, unless you're a marathoner, then you need to get on those right away. But long time to go to the World Champs, and this outdoor season's just getting started.
Yes.
So, again, thanks for tuning in. Kevin, we miss you if you're watching. I hope you're enjoying your vacation with your wife in New Orleans. And we'll be back next week. Well, she won't, but I will. And then we'll the three amigos will be back in a couple weeks, all to rehash this beginning of the outdoor track season. So, signing off from here. Thanks, guys.